I'm Nikki Cauchi, your host for this episode. Today I'll be speaking with James and Annie Layton, who are the pastors from Encore Church in Hawthorn here in Melbourne. James and Annie, welcome to the show. It's great that both of you could be here.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
Now, James and Annie, you started Encore Church 2 years ago, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, you two have been married for 21 years. You have 3 children. For all the romantics out there, why don't you tell us how you two met?
Let the romantic answer that.
Indeed. Well, we met across a crowded church in the late 80s and we're both very different, from different backgrounds. We, I guess, got together through ballroom dancing classes, which sounds bizarre, but...
It is bizarre.
Something we chose to do, and we were known as the blonde girl and the thug, actually, at those classes. James had...
And he was the thug.
The beads and the earrings, and I had the perm with the shoulder pads and the big 80s buff fringe. So we were an unlikely match, but I think we got together. The romance blossomed as we did the classes.
Okay, that's great. Now, as I said, 2 years ago you began Encore Church. What led you to start a church?
I've been in ministry for a few years now, and as has Annie, but I brought the idea up maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago, and all I said once was, I think we'll start a church one day. And Annie's response was, that'd be great when hell freezes over. That's about when we'll do that. So I sort of sidelined the idea for a while. It was only ever a passing thought, but it grew stronger, and then I think Annie got some clarity on that as the years went on, didn't you?
Yeah, it started for me in about 2008. I was at a conference in Sydney with a family, and it just seemed from the moment that conference started, God started speaking to me about starting a church. And for us at the time, and we were really happy, we were sitting in our sweet spot, I guess you would say, of both in a thriving church in the peninsula and loving life, and things were very successful and blossoming for us. So the thought of starting back at scratch was just like, oh Lord, I don't want to do that. But God has a great way of wooing us over, and so that was 2008, and by 2010 we had left home church in Frankston there, and we'd started our journey, and we had our first service September 2010.
Now, why the name Encore?
Great question. You can...
Yeah, well, I think for us, we wrestle with names, and of course there's always that thing of a name that's accessible and that people can instantly know what it means. And
or not.
Or not. We wanted people to, I guess, and they've come towards us with their own interpretation of what that is, but we wanted people to feel that no matter where they're at, they were cheered on. And also we wanted people to know that there's always more. There's always more. So I think Encore painted that picture without any description needed. And even since then, people have overlaid their own idea on that. It is, people say, oh, Encore Church, he's coming back. Things like that we never thought of. We wanted people to know that we are cheering you wherever you're at, and that there is more for you.
Yeah.
So what is Encore Church all about? What do you believe?
That's a really good question, Nikki. There's about 3 million ways to answer that could all sound really good. So the one that comes up so naturally for us is, it's more around the idea of a question, that is, what if God was more like a loving father than a harsh judge? When you start to look at church life and what Encore Church is, or what our church family is from that perspective, what if God is more like a loving father than a harsh judge? How then do we do life with each other in church on that basis? And it's led us in a completely different direction to where we've come from in a lot of ways, and what we've been involved with in church life over the last 20, 25 years. This question has led us to do church in a fairly different kind of way, would you say?
So if a new person came to your church, what would they experience?
Well, we've really aimed to make an accessible, family, authentic atmosphere. So we're both avid coffee drinkers as well, so we've had a lot of coffee in the mix, but we try and make it a really family atmosphere. God spoke to us very clearly around that idea of a loving father, that we were building a family. So everything you would expect to have in a family home, we've tried to have in our church format. We've tried to have a platform for people to come and wrestle faith. So something that's been very important to us was conversation groups. So someone will give a message and then we break up into small groups, and the idea is you have permission to process wherever you're at. So if you come in and you're not a believer, you can listen to ideas and you can wrestle faith in that group format. But also then we go to coffee break, where the friendships continue from the group over coffee. So you continue to chat and get to know each other. So perhaps in the old days it was turn around and meet the new person. We have conversation groups, so you automatically become friends in that discussion group. Then you get up together and go and have coffee, and then return back to the second half, which is about experiencing God in more of a spiritual, supernatural way through our idea of soaking.
Well, actually, Annie, I'm glad you spoke about that, because I've been doing a bit of research and I've found out that part of your service, you lie on the floor on big cushions.
It's very tiring doing
and you have worship music playing. Now, what's that all about?
Well, look, there's an idea in the Bible which is waiting on the Lord. So we've modernised that to the idea of soaking, which is the same concept of just lying still and doing nothing. Literally, not striving, not praying, not pressing in, just lying down and letting God wash over you with his presence. So we thought we'll set that up. We'll facilitate a platform where people can lie on the ground. We've got a band that plays music for about 30 minutes. And we also host what we call an inquiry time, which you might want to give more background on the inquiry time.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like we've actually strategized this, but it's really actually just emerged. It's evolved out of like the lying on the ground thing. I found that was a way I could really authentically connect with God. So it actually just started with me in church. I would just lie down and say, what's real? I want to connect in a way that's real, what works. And that worked, and it sort of evolved out of that. And the inquiry time was another idea that sort of came to us that evolved naturally, which around the idea of let's ask God a question and presume that in the same way if I was to ask Annie a question right now, she wouldn't wait 5 minutes and tell me the answer. She'd tell me the answer now. If I asked you when your birthday was, you'd say it's January, or you wouldn't wait. So what if around the idea that if we ask God a question, you know, Lord, show me a picture of how you see me, or tell me something you like about me, or tell me something, that what if God answered that straight away? So we started just an inquiry time, let people come into a quiet space in church and ask God a question and see what sort of answers they got, and just let them sit in that for 5 or 10 minutes. And we found
James,
people
we're just going to have
started
to take a break. Sorry about
Sure.
that, but we'll come back to that because that's very exciting. We'll be back in a few minutes. I'm talking with James and Annie Layton, who are the pastors of Encore Church in Hawthorn here in Melbourne. Now, James, you were talking about hearing from God.
Yeah, in church. What a strange idea.
Of course.
Yeah, again, it's something that evolved naturally, it was very organic for us to bring this into church. And a lot of it's come out of our own lives and the journey we've been on in our own lives. And hearing from God was part of our journey over the last few years, just hearing clearly and understanding that God wants that day-to-day, minute-to-minute, hour-to-hour intimacy. So if you ask God a question, that he'll answer, and realising that we work on this thing called the rule of first thought. It's not a 100% science, but what about the idea that if you ask God a question, the first thought that comes into your head, if God answers it straight away and he answers into your thoughts, what if that picture of a pink flamingo or a bird on a mountain bike, whatever, like as strange as it could be, what if that first thought or that first picture was God's answer? If you explored that, because I feel like we're so used to dismissing our thoughts, thinking, oh, that wouldn't be God, that's too obvious, or that's too this or that. But what if it was? So we did a lot of experimentation in our own lives, just ask God this, ask God that, and run with that first thought answer, that first image you get. And we found that 99.9% of the time, that really goes somewhere. And you realise, hey, wow, what I was just about to dismiss was God. And I hate to think how many millions of thoughts or times God's spoken to me and I've dismissed it because I thought I was just making stuff up. And again, it's not 100% science, but more often than not, it is God speaking to you. And it makes sense. Again, I ask God a question, he answers it. I feel like that's the level of intimacy he wants with us. And that's the style of relationship he wants with us. So our church is built around those things. We're not doing Encore Church as a way of what's really cool and neat and looks good that we can impress people with, and what's marketable and what are people going to like. It's really around the question, what does God want us to do? And let's just do that. And these are the things that God is doing in us. We're soaking, we're spending time, as Annie said, doing nothing, working from a place of, what if I can't get God's approval any more than I've already got it? So what if me lying here on the ground doing absolutely nothing is a way of saying to God, I can't do anything to get your approval any more than I've got it, so I'll just soak in your approval. And let God minister to us in that sense. And it takes they're things that are just evolving in our lives, and as a result of what's happening in our lives, it's happening in our church. Our church is almost an extension of us and what happens in us. Yeah.
Now, I know that the prophetic plays a big role in your church. Can you explain to me, James and Annie, about prophecy and about prophesying, and what is that all about?
Do you want to have a shot at that?
Yeah, well, it's really an extension of what James is talking about, believing that when we ask God to speak to us, he does, and he's trying to communicate with us all the time. So we believe, Paul in the Bible talks about, he wishes that everyone would prophesy. So we feel like God's saying, you know what, in the old days the superstars would come in, we'd all wait there hoping that he might notice us, that he would bring God's word for our life. Rather than, you should be able to turn to the person sitting beside you and say, hey, have you got something to share with me that God wants to say to me? So we've cultivated this amazing culture at Encore where we say everyone can prophesy. Ask God and believe whatever he said to you is what is for that person you're next to. And what's really cool is everybody asks God and they get things. And we go, okay, now trust it, that what you've got is for that person. And they go, okay, well, I'm getting this. And the person will go, oh my gosh, that's for me. And they'll start crying. And so it's this beautiful idea of every person ministering to each other, not looking to the front and waiting for the official superstar at the front to bring God's voice, but instead looking to the person beside you and going, hey, you hear from God too. What have you got for me? So we call that sort of every believer functioning. Everyone is a minister. The Bible's pretty clear on that. Let's all minister to each other. And that way, when you go out to work on Monday, you've got God's voice for your co-worker, the lady in the street, the mum in the school ground. We're all ministers. We can all prophesy over everybody. So that's what we've tried to grow. And people who are new to the faith are having amazing prophetic words for people who've been Christians for 20 years. It's not about how long you've been a Christian. It's about trusting what God says to you is him speaking.
Which is a scary area in some ways, because you talk about the prophetic and people can either straight away respond out of fear and say, well, what if someone tells me there's something that's not true? And we can, and I heard Graham Cook say once, he goes, I'd rather live with, in the place of getting a revelation, taking a chance on that what I'm hearing is God's voice, than live in the poverty of never getting a revelation because I'm scared of that what I might get could be wrong. And we found when you start to flow in this stuff, there's a few guidelines along the ideas of, well, God's heart is good, he's a loving father, so generally what he's saying to us is encouraging and edifying and empowering. So along those guidelines, we just let people flow in it. We don't try to control people's prophetic words. If someone gets a picture of a Ferris wheel, we don't always encourage interpretation. It's like, just tell the person what you see or what you get. And if it's really obvious that, oh, gee, this may or may not be God, well, just hang on to that. You don't have to say the first thing you see. Sometimes ask the next question. If God's in the habit of answering questions and he answers one and you don't understand what he's told you, ask the next question. Sometimes just blurting out the first thing we see, if I'm prophesying over someone, isn't always the right idea. So a lot of the time we're waiting when you're praying for someone, or again, it's evolved how we do prayer, and it's, if I'm praying for someone, I'll just wait and say, Father, what do you want to say? And not be afraid of sitting in silence for 10, 20, 30 seconds, a minute, and just waiting to see what comes up and then inquiring, okay, God, is this what you want me to say? Rather than just feel like I have to sound interesting and sound professional, so just blurt out 1,000 words and sound really cool. It's like, what if we didn't do that and just waited, what does God want to say?
We're just going to have to take a break again. We'll be back. We're back in a few minutes. Welcome back. I'm speaking with James and Annie Layton. Now, James and Annie, I know for a fact that when God asks us to do something for him, we're going to come up with a bit of resistance from the enemy. So what have the challenges been on starting your church?
Well, I think some of our challenges have been maybe not so much enemy, but about resources. And I think we moved to an hour away from home. We started with probably 4 to 6 adults and a smattering of children and not a lot of money in the account. And we moved into a space where we didn't know anyone at all. So I guess when we started things like rolling out carpets and who's going to make the tea and coffee, they're the kind of practical challenges. But our church took this amazing, redirection where our church has become about inner healing and doing the journey of your heart. So as everybody begins to do the journey of their heart, they begin to do some really tough work with God, which means the last thing they want to be doing is rolling out carpets and putting out chairs. And the last thing we want them to be doing is that either. So we're saying, you know what, you need time just lying on the ground and soaking in God's presence. So all of a sudden we lose all our help in the practical because people are all doing the heart journey, which is far more important to us. So I guess the challenges are, what happens when all of your team needs to have 6 months off to do nothing, to do the heart stuff? You've now got no one to make the coffee or look after the kids. So it's more about the great thing of God taking us on the journey of the heart also means that some of the practical things don't happen. So there are times when the Layton family basically fulfill every function, every role, if not 2 or 3. So maybe there's no many holidays in sight because if we go away, there's no one there to do half the jobs. But it's a great problem to have, Nikki, because it's about God bringing healing to our heart. And that's where the intimacy comes with God as we do the heart stuff, deal with the pain, maybe even sit in some of the pain for a while. But out of that comes freedom. And that's really where our church is headed. It's a church of intimacy with God, which comes out of the freedom of looking at some of the heart stuff as well.
So now on the flip side, what have the positive things been about starting a church?
The healing, I guess, the challenge, as Annie said, well, we came into this church thinking, God, what do you want to do? And it was almost like God tricked us in a funny kind of way, saying, we're going to go do something in the community and do something great. And God goes, we'll do that later, but at first we want to take you and Annie, I want to take you and Annie on the journey of the heart. And that the challenge is going there because we don't like pain. No one likes pain. Nobody wants to look at their heart in case they see what they think they're going to see. So the challenge was the pain, but the positive is the healing. God taking you to a place that you didn't want to go, and sometimes God's led us kicking and screaming into our own hearts and the core. But in that we've learned how gentle God is and how kind God is. And and I've learnt, and even the whole idea that I felt like I believed that, God wants me to be well and whole because he needs me to be this as a leader and to lead a church. And God's going, no, I don't have false motivations to want to heal you. I want you to heal your heart because I love you, not because of your church, because I love you. Can you see that, James? It's like, so I think getting to know the intimacy with God is the plus in this. The challenge was we don't want to face pain. The plus is I think I'm starting to get to know this Father. I think I'm starting to trust. Every time I trust God, he's there. He backs us up. He never takes me places that I'm not ready to go. He never gives me more than I can cope with. I can trust my Heavenly Dad. That's got to be the upside. And now, so I'm not 2 years in, I'm not as afraid of pain as I was. I was afraid of pain and I felt like God took me to my heart, kicking and screaming. And now I'm like, okay, I get it. And it's like Jesus said, I only do what I see the Father doing. He trusted his dad. He didn't have to decide whether he wanted to do what the Father told him to do or not. He already trusted him, so he didn't have to think when God gave him instruction. So I think that's where I'm coming to anyway. I don't have to think when God tells me something to do. So I trust you, I'll do that.
Okay, so if someone wanted to come and visit your church, how would they find out about you?
Well, website and Facebook are probably our main mediums. My Facebook's very interactive and we have a lot of people that write comments and put photos and things up on that, but the website gives you the details as well.
Okay, that's great. Now, James and Annie, I just want to talk about having a purpose because for me, I can see both of you have got, you know what your purpose is, individually, as a couple, as a family, where you're heading. Now, there'd be people out there thinking, well, you know, I can't do what they're doing. I can't start a church. You know, what is my purpose? Do I have a purpose? Does God have a purpose for everyone? And if so, how do they find that out?
Well, I think the great thing about what we've been talking about today with you is learning how to hear the voice of God. And really that is key. And I think for all of us, sometimes we feel like we have to do courses or be studied up or move forward in all these different directions to find our purpose. The key is just to ask God to speak to you and learn to understand his voice. Pursue the intimacy with God that he desires with us. And as we learn to hear his voice, he'll direct us. I was just saying to someone yesterday, it's almost like a skier that goes up off the edge of the ski cliff. We have to almost free fall and let him take us as we land, point our skis in the right direction. So begin to head towards what our heart desires might lead us, but let him direct where we go. If we control it and get in the way, and I know I'm a terrible skier, and if I tense and control my skiing, I end up crashing. But when I just free fall into it and allow God to take me in that direction, listening to his voice and his instructions, we'll find our purpose. But when we strive and control and come out of fear, the skis cross. For us, it's a matter of free falling, going, you know what, God, you've got this. I want you to speak to me. Ask him to speak. He's faithful. He wants to communicate with us all the time. Trust, as James says, that what you hear is him speaking, and allow him to direct that slope as we just head off into the future on the snowfield, so to speak.
And maybe not presume that your purpose is about doing. We're so fixated on doing. God's purpose for me is to be an evangelist or a missionary or to be a TV presenter. Or what if God's purpose for you is to be well and whole? And not about what you do, but about just being, you know. Just a question, you know.
James and Annie, I'm so glad that you could come and speak with us. You are just a gorgeous couple, and, you know, your church sounds fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Well, that's all we have. I'm Nikki Cauchi, and I just want to say God does have a purpose for your life, and he loves you and cares for you very much. So I want to thank my guests again, James and Annie Layton from Encore Church, and that's all we have. So bye-bye. I'll see you again next time.